Following the switch from 6v6 to 5v5 in 2022, Overwatch saw the addition of 3 new characters, Sojourn, Queen, and Kiriko. While all 3 of these heroes have seen professional play at one point or another, 2 out of the 3 of them have become pro staples, effectively becoming the poster children for the professional scene. Those 2, of course, being Kiriko and Sojourn. Or at least that's what it feels like, given everyone in higher ranks is constantly complaining about having to play these 2 characters. Or, from a viewership side, it feels really boring to see the same characters being played over and over again. So that begs a question. Are they actually always picked, or does it just feel like it? Well, in order to figure out if they are actually always picked, let's go over their competitive histories first. Sojourn was released during the first Overwatch 2 beta in April of 2022, and she saw no consistent play early on. So, over the course of the first beta, she ended up receiving a few buffs to her alt fire, power slide, and to her primary fire. However, by the time June of 2022 rolled around, she really hadn't made a presence on the meta. However, following Soldier's nerfs and people eventually realizing how good it is to have a mobile hit scan who can one-shot you in the head, Sojourn started to see an uptick in popularity. Just in time for the summer showdown, Queen was added to the list of available heroes, and a new composition quickly rose in popularity, Jobs. The Jobs composition was comprised of Queen, Brigitte, Lucio, Genji, and a hitscan, and that hitscan, while it started as competition between Ashe and Sojourn, it fairly quickly fell to Sojourn. Going from the Summer Showdown to the Countdown Cup, Sojourn saw a slap on the wrist, and Queen saw some major nerfs that removed the Jobs composition, and Sojourn fell out of favor for a little bit. As the Countdown Cup meta progressed, it transitioned from a double flex dive comp to a Zarya Baptiste brawl comp, and Sojourn once again crept into the meta, cementing herself as the hitscan of choice, given that she could just slide away from danger coming from the Sombra, Tracer, and Genji that would chase after her, alongside the one-shot headshot she still had. As the Countdown Cup came to a close, Overwatch 2 saw its full release, alongside the release of a new character, Kiriko. On release, Kiriko was the strongest support in the game, and she instantly found herself in the meta alongside Sojourn. The composition that was played throughout the entire 2022 playoffs was a meta consisting of Winston, Reaper, Sojourn, Kiriko, and Lucio. The comp basically existed to provide Sojourn with as much time as possible to build a rail and one-shot one of the squishy targets. Kitsune Rush was also really valuable to farm in a brawl composition because it just provided so many stat boosts at a pretty cheap price. On top of all of that, Suzu also provided invulnerability for 1 full second. After remaining strong for the entire first season of Overwatch 2, Sojourn and Kiri saw some pretty heavy nerfs at the start of the second season. The changes to Sojourn made it so she was no longer able to one-shot headshot even at full charge, while Kiri saw her ultimate and Suzu nerfed alongside nerfing the hand volume because her hand could block headshots during certain animations. It's also worth noting that the dev note specifically called out Sojourn for being strong in higher tiers of play while being extremely weak in lower tiers of play, which is something that both Kiri and Sojourn would eventually fall into. While 2022 might have ended with nerfs and 2023 began with them, Sojourn and Kiri were still played in the professional meta. While Kiri saw slightly more play than Sojourn, both of them were falling out of meta, mostly due to the nerfs they had received. Sojourn started off the year only having to split playtime with Cassidy after his buffs, but after Hanzo and Ashe received buffs in March, Sojourn needed to split even more playtime with even more hit scans. Kiri started off the year only needing to split playtime with Ana, but following Baptiste's buffs in March, Kiri needed to split playtime with him as well. By March, neither of them were the preferred hitscan or flex support. Dive comps typically ran Brig Ana as their backline of choice, while brawl comps typically ran Lucio and Baptiste. Sojourn did see some play, but her competition in the hitscan slot was a little too high, and even after Hanzo's nerfs, double flex DPS rose in popularity regardless of the comp, whether that be Tracer plus Sombra or Echo for dive, or Sim plus Mei for brawl comps. However, on maps that heavily favored brawl, Sojourn did see play when a hitscan was preferred over the double flex comp. The meta up until this point had been pretty stable, with Kiri and Sojourn seeing some play, but the August 10th, 2023 patch shifted a lot of power around. This patch saw Ana and Brig getting nerfed and Illari's introduction alongside buffs to Soldier and Bastion, which overall led to a pretty major meta shakeup. Bastion, Sojourn, and Soldier were all competing with each other, and after some nerfs, Bastion and Sojourn were really the only two hit scans left. Kiriko also saw some play at this time, but Baptiste, Illari, and Lucio were all the main supports that were played, and Ana Briggs still saw more playtime than she did. It's also worth noting that this patch changed the way her damage worked, where her kunai got a 5 damage buff, but the critical multiplier reduced. Given that crits happen more often in higher ranks, this was probably because of the skill disparity between high and low ranks. By the time the Overwatch World Cup 2023 ended, the best DPS in the game were Sim, Mei, Sojourn, and Bastion, and Kiri was mostly out of the support meta, but she did see some play despite being weaker than the others. Towards the end of 2023, Kiri saw some more changes to her Suzu, primarily making it heal more, but reducing the intangibility it provided. Going into 2024, Malga was meta, but fell out of it, and early 2024 had no real meta composition. Sojourn and Kiri both saw somewhat consistent play in the professional meta, and overall it was a very map and team-dependent meta, which is healthy for the game, but it was also very counterpick heavy, which had continued from the prior year, which isn't as healthy for the game. While the first half of 2024 had both Sojourn and Kiri seeing some play alongside their competition, in June both of them got nerfed pretty hard. Sojourn's secondary fire no longer required overclock to pierce enemy players, but it got its damage reduced to a maximum of 100, which means that her headshot damage went down from 195 to 150. Kiri got her Swift Step cooldown increased by 1 second, and Suzu was no longer allowed to cleanse hard knockdown stuns like Earth Shatter. Sojourn losing her lethality took her out of the meta, whereas Kiri wasn't effectively removed from the meta until she got the 225 HP nerf. This patch also introduced Juno to the game, and the Juno Brig backline would soon become the staple and the meta overall. Once the Brig Juno backline caught on in popularity, hardly any other supports were played in any situation. Ana saw a tiny bit of play on long-range maps like Circuit or on some maps like Ilios, and Kiri Lucio saw a tiny bit of play on dive maps like Ilios as well, but it was almost always Brig Juno all the time. Despite receiving compensation buffs, neither of them saw any play until after 2024, given how strong the Brig Juno backline was, and the metas that came with it. Sojourn eventually saw her railgun's lethality increased again from 100 to 120 max, or a 180 headshot instead of the 150. Kiri saw both of her cooldowns get their cooldowns decreased by 1 second each, and her DPS increased by lowering her kunai recovery time. The start of 2025 had Sojourn, Genji, and Tracer fighting over the DPS spots, while Lucio, Kiriko, and Juno were the main supports played. Juno and Brig receiving nerfs allowed Lucio and Kiri to come back into the limelight, and Sojourn getting the lethality buffed meant that she could now take care of 225 HP targets a lot easier. As the early 2025 meta continued, the meta changed from Genji and Tracer towards Sim, Torbjorn, and Pharah. Sojourn would sometimes lose play to the Sim-Torb DPS duo, but generally it was the Flux DPS that swapped to one of them instead of Sojourn switching to Torbjorn or Sim. Once perks were introduced to Overwatch, that's when Sojourn truly cemented herself as the premier hit scan. Kiri started to lose out to Juno Brig regaining popularity, but she was still among the most played supports. The main reason for both of these is the perks they received. Sojourn received quite possibly the strongest perks, at least compared to all other hit scans. Sojourn got Overcharge, which provides her plus 50 charge to Railgun's max energy while using Overclock, and a second slide. Kiri, on the other hand, got Shuffling, which allowed her to cast Swift Step again within 4 seconds of using it for the first time. So basically, both Kiri and Sojourn received perks that made them more evasive, and Sojourn got one that made her ultimate even better. Despite Sojourn seeing a nerf to her slide, it really didn't do anything to remove her from pro play. If anything, Cassidy receiving a fall-off buff did more to lower her playtime, because now there was another hit scan she had to compete with. In the lead up to 2025's Champion Clash, There was a lot of hero variety, but Sojourn and Kiri were among the most popular characters played. Following the Champions Clash, Freya's release led to Sojourn falling out of the meta, though if you couldn't play Freya, Sojourn was the best alternative hit scan, but Freya was by far the best character in the game at the time. While Kiri was still competing with other flex supports like Juno and Baptiste, she was still one of the better supports to play and found herself frequently picked and banned because of that. As Freya received nerfs and was no longer the premier hitscan, Sojourn and Cass started to rise up in popularity, with Cassidy being more prevalent across the board, but Sojourn was still good, especially on faster maps like Flashpoint. Going into the summer, the meta transitioned towards blocking tanks, starting off with Orisa, followed by Ramattra, who, because of armor bugs, could deny way more damage than they were supposed to. The best DPS in the game then were those that could actually deal damage to these blocking tanks or completely circumvent them, targeting the backlines. Symmetra was the standout DPS, but the hit scans that were played with her were Sojourn and Cassidy. And while there was a good amount of diversity in the support roster, as the meta progressed, Lucio and Kiri became the dominant support duo. Even with Bap seeing some play, he was simply too easy to run over in comparison to Kiri. Following changes to how armor interacts with blocking, alongside nerfs to both Cassidy and Sojourn, Sojourn was out of the meta for a while, but Kiri received a buff going into Season 18. Kiri might have lost the oh-so-annoying double teleport, but in exchange, Foxtrot, the perk that just gave movement speed from Suzu before, now also granted double cooldown recovery for 3 seconds. The nerfs that Sojourn got reduced her health from 250 to 225, but in exchange, she received a fire rate increase and a slide cooldown decrease. This hammered her win rate immediately, but it would rise over the course of the season, given that her lethality and survivability was still there, just not in the form of health, it was now in the form of her mobility. This was also the season where Wuyong was introduced, and Wuyong double flex DPS immediately ruled the meta, but given that hit scans like Cass and Sojourn were still lethal, people just needed time to adjust to their lower health values instead of being the overpowered picks they were previously. This was also the season where pick rates were now available to the general public, and so looking at their pick rates in Overwatch 2 Season 18 in GM+, yeah, both of them were still really strong. Sojourn had an 18% pick rate with a 49.4% win rate, while Kiri had a 52% pick rate and a 48.3% win rate. Sure, both of their win rates may be on the lower end, but these are also characters that people are more likely to switch to while losing. Also, when looking at all ranks instead of just GM, their win rates fall off pretty significantly, but their pick rates don't fall off by nearly as much. Even through all of the changes that have happened to Sojourn and Kiri, and outside of them, the addition of 5 new characters and Vendetta even earlier, Kiri and Sojourn have cemented themselves as part of the meta to this very day. The strongest composition during the Overwatch 2025 World Grand Finals was a D.Va or a Zarya alongside Sojourn, Lucio, Kiri, and since Vendetta's release, the meta has solidly been Zarya, Vendetta, Sojourn, Kiriko, Lucio. So given even the release of 6 new characters hasn't been enough to throw Sojourn out of the meta, why are they always picked? Well, I think a good way of figuring out why these characters are always picked is to look at when they haven't been picked and figure out why that was. Sojourn has fallen out of meta when she lacks lethality, mostly because the job of a hitscan is to provide a consistent long-range threat. So, when Sojourn's alt-fire headshot doesn't do enough damage, she falls out of favor for other hitscan. This is most notable during the middle of 2024 because she just didn't have the burst in order to compete with other hitscans. The only other time she's fallen out of the meta is when she lacks survivability. The overreaction to the health nerf in Season 18 saw her disappear from pro play for a while, but she'd eventually make her way back without any buffs to her character. What's kind of funny is that in that Season 18 patch, they said that Sojourn is getting nerfed because she's frustrating to play into, but then instead of addressing either of the things that make her frustrating, i.e. the burst damage on her charge shot or her slide, they gave her a buff to the slide and just reduced her health by 25. So basically, the combination of Railgun's burst alongside her survivability with slide will keep her in the meta as long as no other hit scan does her job better. High, long-range burst damage on a character with great movement is a great combination for highly skilled players to get away with a lot more than most other hit scans. Additionally, Overcharged as a perk makes OC even more of a fight-winning ultimate because it actually enables her to one-tap heads, boosting the headshot damage from 180 to 255. Or just regular slide lets Sojourn take positions that no other hitscan can take without being punished, and double slide just enables that further despite the loss of range on each slide. In ranked, Sojourn may compete with other hitscan consistently, but she still sees a solid 20ish% pick rate in GM+, regardless of the season, and then in the current season, it's been 25%. Now as for Kiri, she's only left the meta because of other supports just being stronger picks instead of Kiri being weak. The only time Kiri was probably weak was during Juno Briggs' Season of Dominance, culminating in the 2024 Grand Finals, or from August to about October of 2024. Kiri truly is a jack-of-all-trades support, going from her solid healing output, it's nothing insane, but it is pretty good. Then she also has great dueling with her headshot and DPS output. She fires 2 shots every second, meaning she can 2-tap 225 HP targets within a second. If it's a 250 HP target, but they're close enough, then just adding in a melee, that's a kill. And even if you don't land any headshots, it still takes just about 2 seconds to kill a 250 HP target from full just by landing your kunai. So Kiri doesn't just have the damage output of a duelist, but she also has the ability to take off angles to enable her to take more duels because of Swift Step. Her TP has a 35 meter range, can go through walls, and is on a fairly short cooldown all things considered. 7 seconds is not that long for how free of a disengage or engage tool it is. Then, of course, there's her other ability. Suzu is broken. It may not sound like much, but 0.65 seconds of intangibility is completely insane, especially at higher ranks where more happens in less time. It also doesn't just provide 80 healing, it provides an additional 30 if it cleanses something, and there are a lot of things that cause that cleanse to go into effect. While it doesn't provide the bonus healing on the global anti-heal, it does cleanse the global anti-heal effect, meaning that for 0.65 seconds, that's full healing going through to whoever is hit by that. And then to cap it off, Kitsune Rush is a crazy strong ultimate. All support ults are usually at least good, and most are fantastic, and Kitsune Rush is no different with its 8 second duration, 30 plus meter range, and it grants move, attack, reload speed, and cooldown reduction. So the main thing that's common between them is both Kiri and Sojourn benefit a lot from burst being a bigger deal at higher ranks. As you go up in skill and in rank, the time to make decisions and the time to kill gets significantly lower. Both Sojourn's Slide and Kiri's TP are burst movement options that quickly relocate them from one place to another. In Kiri's case, it's near instant. Kiri's Suzu also provides a short intangibility period, and that matters a lot more when there's a lot more happening in a short period of time. And on top of that, both Sojourn and Kiri are potent duelists when people can land more shots, especially crits, and people at higher ranks are going to do that more frequently. Basically, their kits enable them to take off angles and win duels a lot more, and people at higher ranks are going to take the off angles and win their duels a lot more than people in lower ranks. So their kit strengths are just leveraged more at higher ranks because burst is more effective and so is off angling. So now the question becomes, is there a way to fix this? And actually, before that, would this even be worth fixing, or is this just a skill issue between low ranks and high ranks? I do think, even if it is just for the sake of mixing things up into higher tiers of play, it would make sense to at least lower their numbers for a little bit, so that way other characters see some play for a tiny period of time. But they are really fun characters to watch and play, especially in higher tiers of play, because of how much they're able to do, without feeling like they're overpowered. However, their kits do still have some frustrations regardless of rank, so it would make sense to change them to reduce that. So, what changes would I make to Sojourn? Well, one consistent thing is that Sojourn and Kiri hitboxes have been kinda weird throughout the entire duration of the game, so it might make sense to change up Sojourn's, especially her crouch. Most other hit scans when they crouch widen their stance, Sojourn doesn't do that, which makes her a little bit more difficult to hit when crouching. Now, one consistent pain point with Sojourn's kit has been her alt fire damage, since if it's just a little too high, it becomes really frustrating to play into, but if it's too low, it's effectively meaningless. Lowering the damage by 5 or 10, while reducing the recovery time to about half a second, will give her more uptime but reduce the burst, thus affecting her more at high ranks and less at lower ranks. Even without Overcharged, Overclock is one of the best DPS ults in the game, and it really doesn't need to be better by enabling you to one-shot, so it can probably go and be replaced by something from Stadium, like Stadium's Aftershock, where the charge shot final blow creates an explosion. Maybe it could be replaced by something similar to Moira's Reversal, where Sojourn recalls her Disruptor shot while keeping it active for the duration of the pull, or for 3 seconds. One final nerf that would target her primarily at high ranks is a nerf to double slide, increasing the cooldown of each slide from 7 to 8 seconds. Just going from 1 to 2 charges of slide is more than enough of a buff, so it should have a more significant downside than just going a little less far. Now, if these result in too heavy of a nerf, then just giving her 25 health back is probably more than fair. Since the issue with her burst mobility and burst damage would be reduced, it makes sense to give her some health back so she can play around a little more. Now, as for Kiriko, it would make sense to nerf her hitboxes just a bit, since she is basically only consistently hittable when you're shooting at her gown thing instead of the torso, which is where most people are aiming most of the time. One other thing that definitely needs a nerf in Kiri's kit is Suzu. The invulnerability duration needs to go down to like 0.4 seconds, and the cooldown can be decreased by 1 second at most. But Suzu just provides intangibility, and that is just inherently broken. Not being able to interact with the enemy for any period of time is just inherently strong. While Kiri is bad at lower ranks, this has more to do with playstyle differences being leveraged between higher and lower ranks. As long as people play Kiri incorrectly, she's going to have a bad win rate. That doesn't mean she's bad, it means people are bad at playing her. So, both Kiri and Sojourn's main strengths is that their burst, both damage and mobility, is incredibly strong. This burst is better leveraged by better players more often than it is for the average player, and because of that, they find themselves in the pro meta frequently, or are at least consistently good options. Could they use some changes to find themselves out of the professional meta? At least for a little bit probably, but they don't really need as fundamental kit changes as many other characters, since it's not their kits that are the issues, so much as the skill difference between higher and lower tiers of play. However, that skill difference could be reined in a bit, and hopefully these changes would accomplish that without hurting the characters. As always, if you disagree, that's fine. Feel free to leave a comment as for what you would change about the characters, and I'll see you guys in the next one.